We're live.
We are live.
We're
Good
live in a lot of
evening.
places.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening.
There's no everybody yet. We just went live. We're supposed to do a
No, just us.
countdown.
Well, no, it's us. We are
Yeah.
everybody.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, we're
We're
everybody.
everybody.
That's right.
It's going to take a minute for some folk to get on. Hey, we can do our own countdown. What we do? 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. Those of you that are coming on right now, the 4 of you, we're doing our countdown live. What we were on? 5,
We're at 5.
5.
4,
Five seems like
3,
it's pretty long.
2, and 1. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages. Welcome to our live Thursday night edition of the Pastor's Roundtable promo recap. Yeah, that was trying to do my Disney voice. So good evening, guys. We're on tonight. People might be wondering, what in the world are we doing on a Thursday night? We're confusing the folk.
Always.
What are we doing?
Listen, you know one thing with Pastors Roundtable, we try different things, different times, different
right.
shows, different topics. We are just making sure that we let you know that tonight is the primer for tomorrow.
That's right. That's right. And not
That's
just
right.
that. Before we get into tomorrow, man, if folk missed last Sabbath afternoon's edition of Pastor's Roundtable, Dr. Henry, man, talk to us, Doc. What did they miss? Was it
I'm just
okay
trying
if
to
they
make
missed
sure,
last
man,
week?
I'm trying. No, they got to go back and see it, man. They
Mercy.
got to see it. But listen, I'm just trying to make sure people can see what I have on, man. I wore this for a purpose. Let me
you
make
gotta
sure that we
zoom
gotta
out.
zoom. We gotta zoom out a little bit so they can see this.
Are we doing branded wear
Oh,
now?
yeah, hey, we can do it now, right? Okay, well,
Might have to go back and
I
revisit
gotta
that
zoom.
conflict of
Yeah,
interest
I got. Anyway,
show.
I'm gonna have to zoom out a little bit more so they can see what I have on. Let me see. We're gonna do this. Okay,
By the
well,
way,
we're just
if
gonna
you're
go all the
joining
way
us
back.
tonight and you're joining, oh, there it is. I see it.
There you go. I just had to let them see that right there. Okay, we
We all
well,
have that. If you had told us, said
hey,
something, we could
listen, man.
have.
I'm just trying to be a little different, man. That's all. All right. Well, let me get back in, man, so I can kind of be
All right.
with everybody else. All right, there you go. Well, listen, last Sabbath, my, we had Dr. Wintley Phipps. He was on, he's been on a lot of podcasts, just spreading that message, man, that things need to change. I think
Is
that's
that what he said?
Well, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but things need to change.
Mercy
Listen,
me.
we revisited the conflict of interest. That's something that the Pastors Roundtable, we had a show on that in the summer. I think it was
June, the first week in June.
Right. And so we kind of revisited that and talked about this whole conflict of interest and how it impacts not only pastors, impacts members, and we're trying to figure out a way on how we can address this in a way where changes can be made. We had the conversation; it was good conversation. We talked about, he talked about his book. I want to let you know you need to go back and see that that show.
But listen, we don't want
how
to
can we
mislead
change them?
folk, because here's part of the thing, though, that I in hindsight, thinking about that conversation and that edition, we knew that we were talking about something that was birthed from the conflict of interest show that we did before.
Yep.
But I don't think we really said anything about conflict of interest, because what we were talking about was the denomination owning intellectual property stuff. But I don't know that we were very direct in making the connection there to the conflict of interest piece. So, but for those of you that may go back and watch it, or you've watched it already and you didn't know the connection, that's where that came from.
Yeah,
Just have to
yeah, and I
throw
think
that out
that
there.
And that first question we asked, I remember we kind of came right out the gate. Remember that, Pastor Paul? And we went hardcore. We really did, right? But great, great show when he talked about that. But then we also went into some other things. In fact, the topic that he introduced last week, talking about evangelism
Mm.
to, I think, first generation Americans, right? Or
Native born.
African,
Yep.
right? And then we talk about native born, but also, even the first generation Americans, because that is the culture that they grew up in, and how we are not doing as well as we want to. And so that kind of took us to what we're going to talk about tomorrow night. And it's going to be a very interesting show. So if you
Need you to
missed last
center
week,
yourself, Dion. Dr.
huh?
Henry need you to center yourself
Oh, there you go. Right.
in the
I'm
frame.
just,
In the frame.
okay. There you go. Wait,
I'm in the frame.
I'm gonna,
Come over. Go over
There,
there.
there we go. There we
there you
go.
go.
I was
All
trying.
right. Yeah.
Trying to be subtle.
So,
Uh,
that's right.
yeah, what he made a very impactful. But let's put it really in context. As you know, Pastor Phipps preached a sermon at the Southwest Region Conference,
Mhm.
and in that
Yeah.
sermon, he tapped into these ideas that we talked about: the conflict of interest, the intellectual property, the evangelism to the second generation immigrants, native born Americans. He talked about these items, and he talked about leadership, the
Mhm.
way we choose leaders. And
Hmm.
so here at Pastors Roundtable, we didn't want to just talk about his sermon, but we wanted to also talk about how we can make a change or offer some opportunities or some ideas in how we can do some change. So we didn't spend a lot of time on the conflict of interest because we had a show on that, and one of the key things we came out of that show is conflict of interest is not a problem. It's the declaration or the sharing or letting people know that there is a conflict of interest. And
Ah.
some of us think that differently, but that was what we came away with in that first show. Last week's show, we talked a lot about the intellectual property and being able to be creative. I think Pastor Phipps talked about the fact that what the system that we're in can stifle creativity among pastors and leaders and within the church. And so that was an interesting you know a statement that he made, that the creativity is lost. One of the things that I came away with that aspect of it is it's interesting that God is a God of creativity. He
Hmm.
created us, and now it seems as if we are not given the opportunity to be quote unquote creative.
Mm.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I struggle with characterizing it that way for this reason. Um, the issue for me in the conflict of interest isn't the whole reporting it and letting folk know. It's the actual language of the policy itself. The language and the policy itself, to me, is what is problematic. I
Mm.
don't think that most conferences and most administrators pay any attention so whatsoever to that. I don't think that there's a lot of stifling of people's creativity, at least not from the basis of the conflict of interest policy. There may be things where, some administrator, some publisher, or whatever just doesn't like the idea, but they don't use for the most part, they don't use the policy itself as the reason for it. They just may disagree with the content and say, I don't like it, we're not going to publish it, or, don't
Hmm.
put that out there. I don't agree with it if it's but I think the problem, and if you have to go back and watch the first show where we did put the language of the policy up there, that I think is the core of the challenge that we face with that conflict of interest thing. Now, I know that there are others who disagree with me, But I think that if we're going to make any change, we talk about change coming, then we've got to have people who sit on North American Division Committee who vote those policies. They are the ones who are in the position to be able to do something about it. So they need to hear from people like us and say, "Hey, this doesn't make sense. This is how this is how this impacts us." Make sure that they understand that, and if they're in a position to do something about it.
That's right. And as we're talking about again, Pastor Phipps' sermon, I think that's the basis where we talked a little bit about conflict of interest and also evangelism, domestic evangelism to the native born and so forth. But going back to this conflict of interest thing, it's there, as you said, Pastor Paul. It's in the policy books, and I don't think a lot of people really enforce it to the letter of the law. But why is it there? Like they need to make some adjustments to what's in the book because people now can pick and choose, what they want to enforce, after allowing practices to continue, and then they'll pick and choose to do that. So I think
And it
that
could be
needs to be
weaponized. Oh man, I said it. I've heard you say
weaponized.
that it
That's
can.
it. No, it can be weaponized,
Yeah.
right? And here's a deeper issue for me, right? And we talked about this, man, some months ago. And in fact, I was just talking about it to a friend today. We do not have a lot of people going into the pastoral ministry. Okay. I mean, few graduates from our schools all over. And I believe some of the factors may be because of what we've been talking about. I think some of the factors, if we can change our policies and change the way that I think Pastor Phipps was talking about stifling creativity in a way. But if we could change that narrative, then that might encourage some more people to say, hey, I want to be a pastor, but with all of the things that are portrayed out there, people just do not want to go through all of that. And so therefore we're losing, I believe, a lot of people that could be in the pastoral ministry that have decided to go different ways. That's just my thought on it. But so tomorrow, Friday night, different time, okay, 9 p.m. Wow, we're going to talk about Eastern time. That's right. We still got somebody on the Central time over here, okay? But we're going to talk about ministering and evangelism to, when we say native born, okay? I think specifically, we're talking about the African American population. But guess what? It also goes with Caucasian and so forth. Those who were born here. And we are also saying that we do have first generation Americans, right? So the culture in the home, if they have immigrant parents, might be, of a West Indian background or whatever have you, but they grew up in this country, okay? And so the culture in the home is one way, but when they, intermingle with their friends and so forth, there's another culture, right? And so what we're discovering is that we're losing that group. Like we don't have a lot of people in that group, that youth group, and those who are, born here, native born. So what can we do about it? Pastor Phipps mentioned some of this in his sermon when he preached at the Southwestern Region Conference camp meeting. We got to address it because if we don't, I mean, what's going to happen to our church? So that's
what I liked about how he addressed it is that he shared that 10% of the African American population in the United States, 10% is made up of immigrants. And our churches fish in the 10%, not in the 90%.
Did we did we fact check him on that? Did anybody?
We
didn't
Any of our
fact
audience
check him on
fact check that?
The audience was asking the question, and we did not get an opportunity to really confirm where he got that information from. But I'm just going off of what he said. but even the concept, even if the numbers are not correct or are skewed, we can just look in our churches and we can see that we can just look at the churches and it makes sense. And
Mhm.
but I think also in the conversation tomorrow we're gonna tap into the church culture. I think we talked a little bit about that. That it's not just the culture of the individual, but it's the culture of the church.
Mhm.
So the church may have Caribbean or immigrants, but it portrays a certain culture to the community in which it worships in, and that could also be a factor in how we are reaching um, the native born or the I thought of them as second generation because as opposed to
Okay.
first generation and Americans, but second generation immigrants. But
Okay.
they
We
are
could be there.
native born.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, we could be
Pew
there.
says 1 in 10. Pew says one in
1 in
ten Black
10.
people living in the U.S. are immigrants.
1 in 10. Okay.
Wikipedia, yeah, Pew says 1 in 10, so that's
That's
aligns with.
10%.
But
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wikipedia says, according to the 2010 census, nearly 3% of people who self-identified as Black had recent ancestors who immigrated from another country. That's not quite the same thing, but the number is drastically lower. So that's
Hmm.
Yeah. So here's another interesting thing, as we're thinking about this topic and preparing for tomorrow. Um, there's a there's some stuff you can find online, some papers that were done, research that was done, and one person mentioned this. I thought it was, thought provoking and something that I think we could agree with. They're saying that the high membership growth rate in the U.S., and I'm quoting from it, received more immigrants from countries with a strong Adventist presence. So when you see a place like New York or New York City, Miami, Orlando, well, yeah, Miami really, right? You see a lot of immigrant presence in that church, in those churches. But those immigrants are coming from countries that have a strong Adventist presence.
Mm.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so this person, Rachel Bacon, again, you can look her up online. Good, she has a paper there. She says that the she says that we may benefit. Well, she's talking about the Protestant denominations, but just us. They say we may benefit and stabilize our growth through a strong international presence. Watch this, a strong international presence
Oh,
to
I see.
stabilize the growth through immigration. So if you
That's fascinating.
so
Yeah.
if you have a strong presence in some of these countries, when they immigrate to the United States, you're going to have a good presence in your churches, right? So that's just one thought. But it doesn't take away, though, Pastor Wade, from the fact that we need to focus on domestic evangelism, meaning evangelizing the people who are here in this culture. And I've been thinking about this. The churches that I've observed that thrive in winning people that are,
Native born.
indigenous, native born, those churches are as high, they have a higher tendency to be involved in community service, not just community distribution, but
Mm.
collaborating with community leaders, getting involved in community initiatives, being very relevant where they are. I'm looking at that. And those churches seem to gravitate more people who are native born.
It's interesting, and we had this conversation in our production meeting earlier this week, and I just wanted to throw this out there for a hot minute. There was a time, it seems, when we were growing up as kids, where Black Adventism and Adventism at large was not as segmented as it is now. And as we look back on it, by the time I got to college, there was a lot of frustration over that because it seemed like Adventism was this colonial representation of a religion that was really steeped out of colonialism and white supremacy. Now, we weren't using that term back then in college. We weren't using the white supremacy thing. I don't even think we were using the term colonialism. What we were using was Eurocentric. I think that was the term that we were using, and that our Adventist culture, Adventist liturgy or worship was very Eurocentric in how we did church and how we did worship. And so it was evidenced in our music. And so in a church, Dion, you and I grew up in the same church. And in our church, it was a very African-American dominated church. Because I was calling names, and I was thinking, yet there was a good mix of Caribbeans in that church as well. So it was a very interesting mix of all this stuff. But our church, we didn't do Black gospel music. We did anthems and hymns and spirituals for the most part. It wasn't until later years that church, but we did very well at that time. And this is the early 80s, mid 80s, in reaching African Americans. We didn't have an issue reaching African Americans. We didn't have an issue reaching Caribbeans. Church was growing. That church, by the way, for those of you who don't know, over a period of about 7 years, that church went from about less than 100 members to over 700 members in 7 years. Again, 700 members, that I don't know what the percentage is, but over the course of 7 years, they went from less than 100. It was about 86 members when we got there, and then we left. It was over 700 members in that church. But there wasn't talk about African American versus immigrant or West Indian, this, that, and the other, because in that time, Adventist culture was a thing. It was the Adventist culture, and we talked about First Day or non-Adventist, worship style cultures, all of that. But now, where we do talk more about Black liturgy and worship styles as they differ from place to place, it seems now we are recognizing that we are having more of a struggle reaching Black American audiences. And so tomorrow night, we're going to dig into that and try to figure out what are some of the reasons for that and what are some of the answers. And we hope that you, our audience, you'll tune in tomorrow night, and we'd love to hear some of the suggestions, some of the observations that you guys have about those two things. What has caused it, and then how do we fix it? A lot of times we have lots of causes and few fixes, but we believe that everybody can chime in on this and has something valuable to contribute to this discussion. So we look forward to your participation tomorrow night. What time did we say again, guys?
9 o'clock.
9
Eastern.
9 o'clock.
9
All right.
Eastern, 8 Central.
What do you guys think about what I said, though? I know it took a long time saying it. I always do. But the thing of the move from more of an Eurocentric Adventist culture to more diversified subcultures within or underneath the Adventist umbrella. Does that seem to be? Have you seen that? Am I stretching, reaching on that? What's your thoughts?
So you're not stretching or reaching. We did reach out to a couple of our leadership, especially those who are involved in evangelism, Natty, and those places, and the church uses a church management software called eAdventist, and in eAdventist we capture the names, addresses of each member, and there is even fields for ethnicities. But interestingly enough, eAdventist shared a statement saying that we really did not capture ethnicities in terms of more than what it says here. We tend to trend that we use ethnicities as opposed to immigrants. So we were not really
We're
tracking
tracking. Yeah.
immigrants; we were tracking ethnicity.
Mhm.
But what has happened over the years as the church grew in North America with churches of specific values, according to what they shared, Hispanic, Haitian, Korean, the Karen, they are considered immigrant groups.
Karen?
Yeah.
Mm.
What is? I'm
Oh,
sorry.
you never heard of the Karen? They are of Oriental ethnicity.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. My mind was. I see the little dude swimming in the water behind us there. We're gonna talk about that in a minute, but
You need to stop. You
I was
need to
thinking a
stop.
different kind of Karen.
No, no, no. Come on, come on. Get your mind out of there. Get your mind out of there. Those groups are considered more immigrant. Um, we
Hmm.
have we have not looked at the immigrant as within the African American church, the immigrants that make up the African American church, or the immigrants that have made up the Caucasian churches.
Mhm.
So we
Mm.
really don't have good data on that, particularly in the Adventist church.
Yeah. What's all?
Um,
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
oh, I was just going
Mhm.
to say that based on what you're sharing, the concept of changing from a Eurocentric to the diversities did happen, but it did not happen along the lines that we can clearly share that each of
And
the
track.
immigrant groups it will track well, because in the African American churches we have a number of immigrants, but we have not been tracking them. We just lumped everybody together. It's only
Mhm.
now we're beginning to look at immigrants being the Koreans, the Africans who are coming over, the refugees who are coming over. It's only now we're doing that, and you can even see that in the leadership of the North American Division. They have identified a vice president for multiculturalism, and so they're
Mm.
looking at it from a culture perspective as opposed to an ethnicity or a immigrant situation. It's more culture and in that culture there are obviously going to be many different styles or different ethnicities.
So,
Mm.
here's one more thing. And I know we're not trying to prolong this and drag this all out. We already been on for 27 minutes.
Oh
Um,
my.
I also note that while Dr. Phipps's sermon was specifically pinpointing this issue and this concern within the Black Adventist Church in North America, I think the reality that the numbers bear is that when we're looking at native born versus immigrant in the broader Adventist culture, we're seeing some of the same trends
Mhm.
that we are not reaching, that even in the Anglo community, the church, like we may be reaching first, second generation Eastern European immigrants more than we are native born immigrants. In the Hispanic church, in the Latino community, I don't know if I'm saying that right, but same thing. I think we tend to be able to reach immigrant Hispanic populations or Latino populations better than we are reaching those who are native born here in the United States. And Dion, you were telling us, as we were talking earlier, that we're seeing some of those same type of trends even outside of the United States, right?
Well, we were talking. What were you talking about? The seminary?
And we were talking
I'm not
about
too sure.
what some of the stuff, the information you were getting from England, from
Oh
over.
yes, 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 yes. Okay, yeah. And by the way, the reason why I brought I was talking to some people today about the seminary and how even overseas, um, they're not getting a lot of theology majors too. I mean, overseas in their schools. So all right, but let's go to Europe. Yes, in Europe, specifically England. You can check out the England. I think it's South England Conference,
Conference.
North England Conference. Check out their conference. The majority of people that are there
Caribbean.
are immigrants, descent, yeah, Caribbean, of African descent. You know,
Probably a lot of
I
Indians
mean,
there too, yeah.
yeah. So that whole conference is just different.
Hmm.
the Caucasian population there is not strong at all.
And that's
according
not
to
because
my
they have
research.
like what we have over here is like we have intentional regional and state conferences. That's not
Right.
because of that. That's just
It's not. Right. Right.
wow.
So what are we doing? How are we reaching the native born individuals in like America and Europe? You know,
I,
Canada. I don't know about Canada too. So I'm I know
I,
that's a part of North American
I know
division
there are
as
pockets.
well.
I know there are pockets within the cities.
Okay.
Obviously, you go to Toronto. It's a mirror of the
New
African
York
American
is
church in
right.
I
in
bet you what
England
though.
and even in New York.
I bet y'all what. I bet that we could get us some African Americans in the churches now if we started giving some free some free swimming lessons and some giving away some folding chairs.
You've crossed the line, my friend. You've crossed the line. You've
Ah
crossed the
boy.
line. You've
Ah
crossed the
boy.
line. That has it's interesting. It is interesting the city that incident has happened. I guess we pivoting a
Yeah,
little
let's
bit,
go out on
but
that. So, because our time is
it's interesting the city in which that happened, Montgomery. When I visited Montgomery, the very dock in which I think that incident happened is the dock where African American slaves were brought into the city of
Come
Montgomery
on.
and
What?
then marched up to the warehouses that you still see in on the main city there, and actually walked over to the selling block, which
the
is
auction
a
block. Yeah.
circle place. Yeah, it was a rough visit for me, and all of this is in the shadow of the Capitol building that's right up the same street. And so to hear this brawl that took
Wow.
place, and although I don't think it was I don't know. I'm not the leadership in Montgomery is not talking about it as a race issue, but I don't know. I don't know if it was. I can't say it was or it was not, but just the way it's being shown and the way it's being talked about, it's not a far stretch.
Oh
Yeah.
my.
Man, I read an article that said that there was a time in Montgomery where and these weren't really slave quarters; these were like holding pens.
Mhm.
Um,
Yes.
that
Yeah.
that there were more of these holding pens where they would hold slaves before they were auctioned off. There
Mhm.
were more of those in the city of Montgomery than there were churches and hotels put together.
Come
Wow.
on.
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
goodness.
Yeah.
Anyhow.
My goodness. Yeah.
All right, Stephanie says this sounds like a show. She's saying, "Come on, guys,
Yeah, yeah,
let's
yeah,
go,
yeah, yeah,
let's
yeah,
go,
yeah,
let's
yeah,
go."
yeah,
All
yeah,
right,
yeah, yeah.
we
Well,
got
listen,
you,
we have a
Steph.
lot to talk about. We got a lot to talk about on the Pastors Roundtable. Look, I think, get ready for tomorrow. Tomorrow at 9 o'clock. We need to see you there. This is going to be a great topic. And we also need your input. So in that chat tomorrow night, just write down, follow our conversation and questions and so forth, but also some possible solutions. What can we do so that we can do what Rachel calls domestic evangelism? So please, tomorrow night.
Yes. Yes.
All right,
Raj, this is your time, man. I don't know why you.
Listen, thank you
go.
for joining us for this quick
There you go.
promo and opportunity to just vent a little bit, share a little bit. But we want you to be back here tomorrow, 9 o'clock Eastern, where you partner with Pastors Roundtable to help make ministry relevant,
Resourced.
And real. God bless.
All right. Now I'm going to let this music play a little loud for a second or two to make it look like we actually have an outro or something.